arid winds whispered tales of devotion across the ancient lands of Judah, carrying the scent of dust and distant incense. In a small, sun-baked village nestled amidst rolling hills lived Ilara, a young woman whose spirit burned with a quiet, unwavering flame of faith. Her family, known for generations as pillars of piety, had bequeathed to her a legacy of profound reverence, a sacred trust she guarded fiercely. Each dawn found her engaged in meticulous rituals, her hands shaping dough for the morning bread, her lips moving in silent prayers for her kin, her community, and the ever-present, ever-watchful God of Abraham. Her life revolved around these hallowed rhythms, finding solace and profound purpose in their predictable embrace. For Ilara, every act, every breath, was an offering, a conscious effort to honor her ancestors, and through her unwavering devotion, secure divine favor, a blessing she believed essential for the very survival and prosperity of her people. Yet, a subtle disquiet began to stir within the familiar tapestry of her spiritual experience. Initially, it was barely perceptible, a faint dissonance in the harmony of her prayers. The customary warmth, the comforting certainty that had always accompanied her communion with the divine, seemed to wane, replaced by a peculiar coolness. Simultaneously, small misfortunes, like pebbles dropped into a still pond, began to ripple through the village. The harvest, usually bountiful, was delayed by unseasonal weather, its yield diminished. A perplexing illness, resistant to traditional remedies, afflicted the children, their cries echoing through the narrow streets. Ilara, ever vigilant, attributed these setbacks to minor transgressions, collective failings that demanded greater repentance and intensified devotion. She redoubled her efforts, her prayers becoming more fervent, her fasting more rigorous, convinced that increased piety alone would mend the fraying threads of divine connection. The true tremor, however, struck during a critical moment. A fever gripped the youngest child of her neighbor, a fragile life hanging precariously. Ilara, with the weight of communal hope on her shoulders, knelt beside the small cot, her hands clasped, her heart a desperate plea. In such moments, she had always felt it, a profound sense of peace descending, a quiet reassurance that her petitions were heard, that a divine presence enveloped them. But this time, there was nothing. No warmth, no comforting certainty, only an unsettling void, an echoing emptiness where the familiar presence of God should have been. It was not a rejection, not a wrathful silence, but simply absence. The profound lack of response was more chilling than any perceived anger. Ilara, though unnerved, brushed it aside, attributing it to a test, a severe trial designed to strengthen her faith, to push her towards an even deeper reliance on the unseen hand of God. Was this merely a test, she pondered, or something far more profound, a shift in the very fabric of their spiritual reality? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The unsettling void Ilara had experienced during her prayer for the sick child was not an isolated incident. It was merely the prelude to a deepening crisis that gripped her village. The subtle disquiet escalated into a pervasive despair as the land itself seemed to conspire against them. The delayed harvest now faced an acute drought, the sun beating relentlessly upon parched fields, threatening to wither every last stalk of grain. Livestock, already weakened, succumbed to an insidious illness, their skeletal forms a stark reminder of the encroaching famine. Ilara's personal prayers, once a source of strength and solace, transformed into desperate pleas, each word laced with a growing anxiety that gnawed at her very soul. She found herself prostrating herself for hours, her voice hoarse, her spirit wrestling with an unseen adversary. Seeking answers beyond her own anguished supplications, Ilara turned to the village elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of years and the burdens of their flock. They offered traditional reassurances, recounting tales of ancestors who had faced similar trials, speaking of divine providence and the enduring covenant. Yet, their eyes, clouded with an unspoken fear, betrayed a concern that transcended their calming words. They too felt the shift, the unsettling silence from above. Unsatisfied, Ilara then sought the counsel of the village sage, an ancient man named Zadok, whose dwelling was a humble cave at the edge of the wilderness, filled with scrolls and the scent of dried herbs. He was revered for his profound spiritual insight, a man believed to commune directly with the divine. Zadok listened patiently, his gaze distant, as Ilara poured out her heart, describing the deepening silence, the unanswered prayers, the mounting despair. When she finished, a long moment passed before he spoke, his voice raspy with age. He spoke of times when the face of God is hidden, a concept Ilara struggled to grasp, for she had always known God as ever present, ever listening. He explained that sometimes the divine withdraws, not in anger, but in a mysterious act of sovereignty, leaving humanity to confront its own vulnerabilities. He warned that this silence was not always a benign test, nor a tacit permission to stray, but could be a profound warning, a call to examine their hearts and their ways with unprecedented scrutiny. His words, though cryptic, sent a shiver down Ilara's spine, suggesting a deeper, more terrifying meaning to the emptiness she felt. As the village's plight worsened, the fabric of its communal faith began to fray. Even Ilara's closest friend, Leah, a woman with whom she had shared every secret and every prayer since childhood, started to question their beliefs openly. Leah, her eyes hollowed by hunger and despair, scoffed at Ilara's continued devotion, her fervent prayers. "What good is a God who watches us starve?" Leah had bitterly demanded, her voice raw with a pain that resonated deeply within Ilara. "Where is his favor now, Ilara? Have we not prayed enough? Have we not sacrificed enough?" This betrayal of their shared beliefs, this open renunciation of the faith that had bound them, wounded Ilara deeply. It was a wound that festered, adding to her profound sense of isolation. When even those closest to her, those who had once stood shoulder to shoulder in unwavering faith, began to abandon hope. What truly remained? What anchor could hold fast against such a storm of doubt and despair? The silence from above was now echoed by the silence of shattered friendships, leaving Ilara adrift in an ocean of uncertainty. The profound silence from the heavens, coupled with the echoing silence of shattered friendships and the growing desperation within her village, became an unbearable weight for Ilara. She could no longer bear to watch her people suffer, nor could she reconcile the benevolent God of her ancestors with the chilling void that now enveloped her spiritual life. A desperate need for answers, a yearning to break this suffocating silence, ignited a fierce resolve within her. She would go to Jerusalem, the holy city, with its magnificent temple. The very heart of their worship surely held the key. It had to. She believed the temple, the physical dwelling place of the Most High, would offer the divine presence she so desperately craved, a presence capable of piercing through the oppressive quiet. Her journey to Jerusalem was arduous, a physical manifestation of her internal struggle. Each dusty step on the winding, rocky paths was a prayer, each sunrise a renewed plea. The sun beat down mercilessly, mirroring the relentless heat of her internal questions. She walked for days, her feet aching, her spirit often wavering, yet the image of the gleaming temple, a beacon of hope in her mind, propelled her forward. She envisioned herself prostrating before the Holy of Holies, feeling the familiar rush of divine embrace, the certainty of being heard. This pilgrimage was more than a physical trek. It was a spiritual odyssey, a last, desperate attempt to reclaim the faith that was slowly eroding under the relentless assault of absence. Finally, the majestic walls of Jerusalem rose before her, a sight that usually brought tears of joy and reverence. But as Ilara entered the city, a strange sense of foreboding settled upon her. The bustling streets, the throngs of pilgrims, all seemed to move with a distant hum, disconnected from her own profound quest. She made her way to the temple, its grandeur undeniable, its towering stones a testament to centuries of devotion. Yet, as she stepped into its courtyards, a chilling sensation washed over her. The air, usually thick with the palpable presence of the divine, felt strangely hollow. Her fervent prayers, poured out with every fibre of her being, now felt like whispers into an abyss, lost echoes in a vast, indifferent space. The familiar sense of divine presence, the comforting warmth that had always permeated this sacred space, was conspicuously absent. It was replaced by an echoing emptiness, a cold embrace that offered no solace, no reassurance. The temple, for all its majesty, felt as silent and unresponsive as the wilderness she had just traversed. Disheartened but not yet broken, Ilara sought out the wisdom of the city's scholars, hoping for an explanation, a theological framework to understand this terrifying divine withdrawal. She found herself in a quiet corner of the temple grounds, listening to a group of men debating ancient texts. One scholar, a man named Eliakim, known for his incisive intellect and often cynical views, spoke with a casual detachment that sent shivers down Ilara's spine. He spoke of God's absence, not as a mystical phenomenon or a divine test, but as a mere metaphor, a human construct born of primitive minds trying to rationalize suffering. The hidden face of God, he mused, is merely the reflection of humanity's own evolving understanding, or lack thereof. There is no hidden face, only our limited perception, or perhaps nothing at all behind the veil. His words, though logical in their cold, rational delivery, were a chilling assault on Ilara's core beliefs. They stripped away the mystery, the hope, leaving only a stark, mechanical universe. Was the terrifying silence she experienced a test of her faith, as the village sage suggested? Or was it, as Eliakim implied, proof that there was nothing to test in the first place? The question hung heavy in the air, threatening to unravel the very foundation of her existence. Overwhelmed by the scholar's stark pronouncements and the temple's hollow embrace, Ilara found herself fleeing Jerusalem, the city that had promised solace but delivered only deeper despair. The familiar stone streets, once symbols of hope, now felt like shackles, each step echoing the emptiness within her. She sought refuge in the desolate wilderness, the vast, silent expanse of the Judean desert. Here, among the craggy rocks and endless dunes, she hoped to find an answer, or at least a quiet place to wrestle with the profound doubt that now consumed her. The silence of the desert, however, was not the peaceful balm she craved. Instead, it mirrored the deafening silence she perceived from heaven, amplifying her torment. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper Eliakim's cynical words, every shadow a reminder of the God who felt utterly absent. She wandered for days, her provisions dwindling, her spirit fraying. The sun beat down with relentless indifference, baking the earth and parching her throat, a physical manifestation of the spiritual aridity she endured. She questioned everything she once held sacred, the efficacy of prayer, the meaning of sacrifice, the very existence of a benevolent God who would allow such suffering and then retreat into an impenetrable silence. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of doubt and desperate pleas. Yet no answer came, no comforting presence, no sign. The wilderness, once a place of prophets and divine encounters, now felt like a tomb, burying her faith under layers of sand and despair. In her increasing isolation and physical exhaustion, Ilara experienced unsettling visions. They were not the vivid, terrifying images of divine wrath she had been taught to expect for transgression. Instead, they were far more insidious, more profoundly disturbing. She saw not a God of anger, but a God of profound indifference. A vast cosmic apathy that simply did not register the cries of humanity. It was a subtle, terrifying form of judgment, more chilling than any fiery condemnation. If God was merely absent, if his face was hidden because he simply did not care, then all her suffering, all her village's plight, was utterly meaningless. This thought, colder than any desert night, threatened to extinguish the last flickering embers of her hope. The silence she now feared was not a test designed to strengthen, but a void that would consume. One evening, huddled against a cold rock face, seeking shelter from the biting desert wind, Ilara stumbled upon a small, crumbling cave mouth. Inside, protected from the elements, she found not treasure, but something far more precious in her state. Ancient scrolls, carefully preserved in clay jars. With trembling hands, she unrolled one, its brittle parchment crackling softly. The text, in an archaic script, spoke of prophets and patriarchs who had endured similar periods of divine silence. It recounted tales of Job, of Elijah, of Israel in exile, moments when God seemed to withdraw, when heaven felt empty. But these accounts did not end in despair. They spoke of refining fire, of a deeper understanding forged in absence, of a faith stripped bare of expectations and rebuilt on a foundation of pure trust. These texts suggested that the silence was not always a punishment or indifference, but a crucible, a painful process through which a more profound, more resilient connection was forged. A faint glimmer of light pierced through Ilara's pervasive darkness. Could absence truly purify, as these ancient words suggested? Or would this relentless silence only consume her, leaving nothing but dust and disillusionment? The question hung heavy in the desert air, a fragile thread of hope in a vast, empty expanse. The scrolls offered a new lens, a possibility that this terrifying void might, in some mysterious way, be part of a larger, divine design, a painful path towards a truth she could not yet comprehend. She clutched the ancient parchment, its words a fragile lifeline against the encroaching night and the chilling whispers of doubt. The desert, though still silent, now held a different kind of quiet, one laced with ancient wisdom, hinting at a purpose beyond her immediate pain. The faint glimmer of hope, sparked by the ancient scrolls, was a fragile thing, easily extinguished by the harsh realities awaiting Ilara's return. She journeyed back from the wilderness, the parchment clutched tightly, its words a fragile shield against the world. Her village, once a vibrant tapestry of communal life, was now a fractured landscape of despair. The drought had deepened its grip, the fields lay fallow, and the faces of her neighbors were etched with a weariness that went beyond physical toil. Their eyes held a profound emptiness, mirroring the very silence that had driven Ilara to the desert. The communal faith, once a unifying force, had splintered into resentment and bitter resignation. Her closest friend, whose name she now rarely spoke aloud, epitomized this unraveling. Ilara found her, hollow-eyed and gaunt, sitting by the dried-up well, staring blankly at the cracked earth. The friend, once so full of laughter and shared devotion, now turned a gaze of raw accusation upon Ilara. "Where was your God, Ilara?" she spat, her voice raspy with disillusionment. "Where was he when our children wasted away? Where is he now, when our very soil turns to dust?" Her words were not just questions, they were bitter accusations, a venomous echo of Eliakim's skepticism, amplified by personal suffering. Ilara felt the weight of her community's suffering pressed down upon her, a crushing burden that threatened to extinguish the last embers of her own fragile hope. Her unresolved questions, her own lingering doubts, roared to life, mingling with the collective grief. The silence from heaven felt heavier than ever, a tangible shroud suffocating them all. Driven by an instinct she couldn't fully articulate, a desperate need to understand the source of such profound suffering, Ilara felt compelled to return to Jerusalem. Rumors had reached even her remote village, whispers of a radical teacher, a man who spoke of a different kind of kingdom, who performed miracles, and who was now facing execution. The journey felt different this time, less a pilgrimage for answers and more a reluctant draw to a tragic inevitability. The city itself was abuzz with a morbid energy, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and a strange, almost celebratory fanaticism. She pushed through the crowds, her heart pounding with an unknown dread, until she reached the hill. Golgotha. There, against the stark grey sky, 3 figures hung, crucified, her eyes fixed on the central one, the radical teacher. His face, though marred by suffering, held an inexplicable dignity. And then she heard it, a cry that ripped through the very fabric of her soul, echoing the deepest fears she had harbored. My God, why have you forsaken me?" The words, wrung from the depths of ultimate agony, resonated with every unanswered prayer, every silent night, every moment of perceived divine absence Ilara had ever endured. This single shattering cry broke through her understanding, shattering the fragile framework of her faith. It was not just the physical suffering she witnessed, but the spiritual agony, the profound abandonment expressed by the one they called the Son of God. If even he, the embodiment of divinity, could utter such a desperate plea, could experience such a profound silence from heaven, what hope was there for humanity? What hope was there for her village, for anyone who sought solace in a God who seemed to withdraw in the face of ultimate pain? The silence she had wrestled with in the wilderness, the indifference she had feared, now seemed to have found its ultimate, terrifying expression on that hill. The cross stood as a stark monument, not just to human cruelty, but to a divine silence so profound, so absolute, that it swallowed even the sun. The world tilted on its axis, and Ilara felt the ground beneath her feet give way. The world had indeed tilted for Ilara, but not into an abyss of final despair. The raw, guttural cry from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" echoed in her mind, a haunting melody that paradoxically began to unlock a new understanding. It was not the sound of a God abandoning his creation, but the sound of the divine experiencing the very depths of human suffering, the ultimate silence, the profound sense of abandonment that she, her friend, and her entire village had grappled with. This was not indifference. This was identification. The hidden face of God, which she had so feared, now seemed to reveal itself not as a mask of judgment, but as a visage etched with the very pain she had sought to escape. The profound silence she had wrestled with was not empty. It was a space where the divine and human anguish converged. Ilara grappled with the profound implications of this revelation. The crucifixion was not just an execution, it was a cosmic act of empathy. The radical teacher, whom she now understood as the Christ, had not merely observed human suffering from a distance. He had plunged into its darkest depths, enduring the ultimate perceived forsakenness. This transformed her understanding of the silence. It was no longer a sign of God's absence or disapproval, but a testament to his willingness to share in the most agonizing human experiences. The hidden face now seemed less like a veil of mystery and more like a profound, suffering love, revealed precisely in its momentary withdrawal. Her faith, once a rigid structure built on expected answers and divine interventions, began to soften, to expand, embracing the paradox of a God who could be both present and seemingly absent, both powerful and vulnerable. A new purpose began to coalesce within her, not as a desperate plea for answers, but as a quiet resolve to comfort others. She remembered her friend, hollow-eyed and bitter by the dried-up well. Ilara sought her out once more, not with words of judgment or theological debate, but with a gaze that held understanding and shared grief. He cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Ilara recounted, her voice soft but clear, her eyes holding the memory of Golgotha. He knew what it felt like. He felt the silence, too. There was no need for grand pronouncements or miraculous signs, only the profound, resonant truth of shared experience. Her friend, initially resistant, slowly met Ilara's gaze, a flicker of recognition in her weary eyes. It was not an immediate reconciliation of faith, but a rediscovery of connection, a shared acknowledgement of a grief that had been validated by the highest possible source. Ilara's transformed faith was no longer solely about immediate answers, but about an enduring presence in the midst of silence, a quiet strength born from shared vulnerability. Slowly, painstakingly, the village began its recovery. It was not through a sudden downpour or a miraculous healing that defied all natural law. Instead, it was through the communal effort, born from a renewed hope that emerged not from the absence of suffering, but from its shared understanding. Ilara became a beacon of compassionate understanding, her quiet strength a testament to her journey. She taught, not with pronouncements of certainty, but with gentle wisdom, that sometimes God's face is hidden, not in judgment, but in the very suffering we share. The drought eventually broke, the fields were replanted, and the community began to heal, not because their questions were answered, but because their pain had been acknowledged, experienced, and ultimately understood. The silence, Ilara realized, was never truly empty. It was a profound, painful path that led her and her community to a deeper, more empathetic connection with the divine, and more importantly, with each other. The hidden face of God was not a sign of his absence, but a profound invitation to find him in the shared humanity, in the cry of the forsaken, and in the quiet, enduring presence of love that persists even when heaven feels empty. Her journey, once fraught with despair, had led her not to easy answers, but to a profound, compassionate understanding that transcended the need for them. The face of God, once veiled in silence, was now unveiled in the shared suffering and enduring empathy of humanity.